Big day. Big day today. You might be thinking, oh yeah, of course, it's a big day because Mythic Raiding has just opened. The last 3 bosses for Heroic and Normal have been unlocked. Mythic Plus no longer has a restriction in item level, so that the fullness of Season 3 is starting. It's a big day because of this, right? No, it's not that. Yes, NA got the reset yesterday, EU is getting it today, but the real big day part of today, of Wednesday, is the announcement, the schedule that Blizzard released for their upcoming plans, which has been quite interesting, because even though the first couple are whatever, okay, if you follow Hearthstone, there's going to be the expansion reveal for the next expansion of Hearthstone in 1 week. There is going to be the Arena World Championship for PvP, for WoW as well. But of course, the bigger announcement is that on the 19th of April, Blizzard is going to announce the next expansion. So this is, of course, the main argument of the day, the announcement of the next expansion. I guess there is also going to be some tiny interest about the Warcraft mobile game that is going to be announced in May. Maybe it's going to be something cool. We will see. But of course, the main course for today is the expansion being revealed in about a month or so. Now, let's start pointing out the timelines, the dates. Is this late? Is this early compared to other expansions? Is there a worrying gap, perhaps? Not really. This is mostly speculated to be on time. Between the announcement of BFA and the release of BFA, and the announcement of Shadowlands and the release of Shadowlands, they were basically about 3 months apart. They were both more or less within a year before the actual release of the expansion. Okay, so it was following a similar trend. Right as the last tier, as the last big patch of the expansion comes out, the next expansion gets announced. That's usually how it works. Usually the next expansion is always announced after the last of the big cinematics of the previous expansion. So as we get into Sepulchre, as Mythic Week opens and we get the cinematic of the defeat of the jailer and whatnot, after that is when the expansion gets announced. That's usually how it has worked. So more or less we are still in time with the timelines compared to previous expansions. This would put the next expansion being released somewhere between February to April of next year. Yes, it's gonna be a long patch. That was assumed already, that this 9.2 would have lasted close to the big old patches like Siege of Orgrimmar, like Hellfire, Citadel, those type of patches. It would have been a tough one to go over, but it seems to be in line with previous expansions in terms of timing. Now, about the actual content, about the actual speculation of what is going to be in the next expansion, because we have talked about this before. We have talked about the set of leaks, predictions, speculations, prophecies that were going to be about the next expansion. We have talked a few weeks ago about this man, this visionary from China, who started his list of predictions all the way back to 2017. Now, why is this relevant? Is because this madman, all the way back in Legion, predicted the release of BFA, the name of the expansion itself, and what it would have been about the Old Gods. It would have been centered around the Old Gods storyline. But back then, this was, about 3 months before the actual release, so, maybe it's legitimate. He got a tip from a Blizzard employee a few months before the expansion being released. That kind of okay, doesn't mean he knows too much. What drove this to a higher level of prediction is when, still several years before it was announced, he also predicted Shadowlands. He predicted that it would have been about the Scourge storyline, that it would have been about a new Lich King, and it would have been about the Shadowlands zone. This was back when we didn't really know much or care much about the Shadowlands as a zone. We heard the name of the zone, we heard it mentioned a few times, but that was it, basically. So, of course, when years in the past you have this man predicting BFA correctly, and then he predicts Shadowlands correctly, you start wondering, wow, does he actually know stuff? Is he actually some big deal in terms of knowing what the next expansion is going to be about? So his prediction for the next expansion that is going to be revealed in about 40 days, so we will know if he was right. His prediction is that the string of expansions of Warlords and Legion were about the Burning Crusade lore. So Burning Legion type of stuff. And then the next couple of expansions, Shadowlands and BFA, would have been about Wrath of the Lich King lore, which is Old Gods and the Scourge. The Old Gods were in BFA, the Scourge, the Undead, the Lich King were in Shadowlands. He was predicting that after the TBC storyline of Warlords and Legion and the Wrath storyline of BFA and Shadowlands, the next expansion would have been about the Cataclysm storyline. So we are going in order, from TBC to Wrath to Cataclysm. And the storylines of Cataclysm are dragons and elemental lords. If you remember, if you have even played back in Cataclysm, basically 10 years ago, Cataclysm started being very centered around the elemental lords. Even the zones themselves had a lot to deal with Neptulon, with Terrazane, with Ragnaros himself, of course, and with Alakir. So it was centered around the elemental lords, and then we shifted halfway through towards the end for the dragonflights, for the dragons. The dragonflights trying to fight the Black Sheep, the Betrayer, the Traitor, Neltharion, or Deathwing, and then they had to eventually band up together, mostly sacrifice their powers into the Dragon Soul to defeat Deathwing. The storylines of Cataclysm were those two, the Elemental Lords and the Dragons. So his prediction was that the next expansion, this was several years ago, the next expansion right now that is going to be announced by Blizzard is going to be about Dragons and Elemental Lords. Now, this is also something that has been predicted before. I'm pretty sure it was more about a wish than an actual prediction, okay? The wish about seeing the Dragon Isles. The Dragon Isles has been a talking point for speculated parts of next expansion for years by now. It was even said that Blizzard actually thought about introducing the Dragon Isles, I think it was in Warlords, perhaps, and then they just scrapped the entire thing. So Dragon Isles has been a thing for a while, has been called for a while. Maybe this expansion is going to be the right time to actually be correct for once about the Dragon Isles and more focus on the dragons. If you think about it, it is true. If you think about it, we have been missing dealing with dragons. They were a focal point of the story for quite a few expansions between Ysera, Alexstrasza, Nosdormu, even Malygos, and then Alekgos. They were, a quite recurrent part of the story. But then we moved out. We moved out into Burning Legion and Old Gods and super galactic threats, outer space, different dimensions, and that's when dragons kind of fucked off into irrelevance. So it would be a good time to bring the dragons back. Dragons are cool, they're pretty, they're nice. It would be kind of nice to see them back, being more centered in the story. Aside from this prophecy, aside from the prediction about what the expansion is going to be about, there are going to be some other worries, okay, from the community. This is most of what we have seen as soon as it was announced. The questions for the community about what do you want to see in the next expansion, what do you not want to see Blizzard do in the next expansion, what do you want to see them focus on, put more effort in compared to the previous expansions, compared to this current expansion. Most of these wishes kind of predictably were about game systems, wishes like less currencies. Don't get us swamped in different currencies for different activities that we have to handle all around. There were the usual stereotypical comments about time gating, about RNG was another thing, as well as more recurring complaints like borrowed powers. Get rid of borrowed powers or similar other complaints. One of them, however, that has been more recurring, more than all of these, which is the one about the threat levels. One of the often used complaints is the request to scale back the threats we have to deal with in the game. You know what I'm talking about, the usual complaints about we used to be adventurers, we used to be mercenaries dealing with this villain in this town, perhaps with this beast in the forest, and then now we moved into spaceships, into alternate dimensions, and giga villains wanting to destroy the entire universe, We could go back to something a little bit on a smaller scale in terms of threats, in terms of things we have to deal with. As I always say, I would be a super fan of dealing, for example, with Murlocs, a very nice Murloc raid, perhaps the uprising of the Gnolls or the Razorfen tribes, and having to deal with those types of much less threatening enemies. I think it would be cool and a nice change of pace. It has been a quite often reused type of complaint in terms of the scales of the threats we have been fighting in the last few expansions. You know, it also has been acknowledged in a way by the lead game designer, Morgan Day, who said that you know, he feels the players' complaints that the literal scale of things can get pretty wild, pretty out of hand, but he recognizes, he sees that players also want to see small things that flesh out the world more, rather than some gigantic threats. We can also tie this together to the release of 9.2. If you remember all the shit Blizzard got at the release of 9.2 for pointing out that this was the culmination of the story that started since Warcraft, that all of the different ties and strings from the previous stories are going to culminate here. Of course, they were getting some flack because it was clearly not true. People weren't really. It's not that the moment the Jailer was released and announced and seen as the final villain, you suddenly remembered all those things from Warcraft 3 or from Burning Crusade or from Cataclysm making sense, because you now realize that the Jailer was behind it all. It was just made up at the last moment, like the Jailer being behind the Helm of Domination of Arthas or behind Frostmourne, for example. It didn't really feel very organic within the story. So they were getting out of flack because of it, and they were pointing out amongst these type of statements that the story would have reset. We would have started anew. This was the last chapter of the story, and from the next expansion, there would have been something else. From Steve Danuser himself, Sylvanas' fictional husband, he said that there is going to be a lot more to go back on Azeroth, that we need to go and explore and deal with and delve into some more of the storylines and characters left there. So it's a good point towards imagining the next expansion being about Azeroth itself. And he went on to point out that this was where the Warcraft story, this chapter of the story, was ending, but a new chapter was beginning in the next expansion. So it is believable that this was going to be the closure, because there was also been quite some worry from some people about Sylvanas. Somehow they are worried that somehow, some way, Sylvanas will sneak through and be part of the next expansion as well. What worried people was one of the statements that one of the devs gave about, don't worry guys, Sylvanas' story is not going to end in 9.2. You will see more of the Banshee Queen. So they started getting worried, but I think that was more to say that she's not going to disappear. She's not going to die and be completely removed from the story. It is somewhat similar to what Blizzard said back in Warlords, when they were essentially telling you, don't worry guys, this is not the end of Thrall. You will see more of him in the future. This was back when players were starting to get quite tired of Green Jesus, and you know, it's not that Thrall died, it's not that Thrall was removed from the story, but he was transitioned to be a more minor character since his last major role in Warlords of Draenor. You know, after that in Legion, in BFA and Shadowlands, it's not that Thrall had too big of a role. He was quite a minor character. Since then, I think this is going to be the similar path that they're going to go for Sylvanas as well. So I wouldn't worry too much about Sylvanas somehow becoming a main character of the next expansion. That being said, this is just about how much we can go for as far as speculation goes, because in just a few weeks, 5 weeks or so, Blizzard is going to tell us themselves what the next expansion is going to be about. What are going to be the main features, perhaps, that they have in store to announce ready? Perhaps a new class or a new spec, which is always something very well requested from the player base. It's time for a new spec, it's time for a new class. Currently, the bigger request is a male class, since we are still stuck at just Shaman and Hunter. And of course, because many people are putting their stocks into Dragon Isles, the Dragon-themed class wearing male is currently the best bet if it is going to be a thing in the next expansion. So for now, at this point, I guess all that's left is waiting until April 19th, when we will get our announcement. There's going to be a lot more to talk about, of course, by the time the expansion gets into the early alpha, the friends and family alpha, and then into the beta, and then we get to see actually what is going to be about. For now, however, we can stop here. We have more current and more close things to go and inspect in the next few days. Mythic Plus and the raid being open is going to give us some room to check out how things are going. Still without a double legendary, still without many people, most people without a 4-piece set bonus or even a 2-piece set bonus. So, you know, we're still lacking some of the power to see the fully unleashed specs and classes for this patch, but it's still nice to go and look at how everyone is doing, how things are progressing over time. At least for me, it's quite interesting, so I'll continue to follow that. But for the time being, this is where we stop for this Wednesday. Of course, as usual, thank you guys for watching the video and for helping to support and grow the channel. You can do more by liking and commenting on the video, as well as subscribing down below. But for today, of course, the subscription button has been enabled to everyone who is a Dragon Isles expansion believer. You can also follow me on Twitter. I promise I will try to post more than once every 2 months, as well as, of course, you can support me over on Patreon right here, which will give you access to my Discord channel as well. Thank you guys for watching. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, I too, by the way, am drinking the Dragon Isles Kool-Aid. And the only way I'm not gonna be disappointed is if it's gonna be an expansion about Murlocs. That would save it all.